In 1994, a two-stroke motorcycle with a 125 cubic centimetre engine produced more power per litre than a Formula One car. By 2004, you could not legally buy a new two-stroke road bike in Europe. There was no explosion, no scandal, just paperwork. What governments killed was not just an engine, it was an entire ERA of raw, affordable speed. And the question no one answered is whether it ever had to die at all. Every time a piston in a two-stroke engine completes a full turn of the crankshaft, it generates a power pulse. One explosion, one surge of force every single revolution. That is not just a technical detail, it is the heartbeat that separated the two-stroke from everything that followed. Where a four-stroke engine waits for two full turns, 720 degrees, before firing again, the two-stroke doubles the rhythm, delivering a blast of energy with every 360-degree spin. This relentless cycle did not just make the engine feel alive, it made it brutally efficient at turning fuel into acceleration. The secret lies in the way the two-stroke handles its work. Intake, compression, combustion, and exhaust all happen in just two strokes of the piston, not four. There is no complicated ballet of valves and camshafts. Instead, ports carved into the cylinder wall open and close as the piston moves, letting fresh fuel rush in and burnt gases blast out in a single fluid motion. Fewer moving parts mean less weight, less friction, and fewer things to break. A classic 125 cubic centimetre two-stroke could be half the mass of its four-stroke rival, with a power-to-weight ratio that left bigger engines gasping to keep up. On the road and on the track, this design translated into a kind of mechanical violence. The 500 cubic centimetre Grand Prix bikes of the 1990s, machines like the Suzuki RGV 500 and the Yamaha YZR 500, pushed out 180 to 200 horsepower from engines barely larger than a milk carton. The result was instant, addictive speed, a razor-sharp throttle, and a sound that announced its presence before it ever came into view. Simplicity was not a compromise, it was the very thing that made the two-strokes so dangerous, so affordable, and so impossible to forget. The story of how that pulse was silenced begins with its own mechanical genius. The two-stroke motorcycle does not just feel quick, it feels unhinged. The moment the throttle cracks open, there is a jolt that is out of proportion with the engine's size. That is the power-to-weight story, lived in real time. With half the moving parts of a four-stroke, the engine weighs less, spins faster, and shoves more force through every revolution. The numbers back it up. In 1994, a 125 cubic centimetre Grand Prix two-stroke was making around 30 horsepower. That is 240 horsepower per litre. At the time, that was more than most Formula One cars could claim. On the street, a Yamaha RD350 or Aprilia RS250 could leave bigger, heavier bikes scrambling to keep up, not because they had more brute force, but because they carried less baggage, literally and mechanically. But it is not just numbers. The expansion chamber, that signature bulge in the exhaust, was not decoration, it was a weapon. It tuned the pressure waves to stuff more mixture into the cylinder, unleashing a power band that hit like a sledgehammer. The result was a sound that did not just announce speed, it threatened it. A shriek at 8,000 revolutions per minute, a crackle on the overrun, a mechanical scream that became the anthem of an era. No four-stroke could imitate it. Riders learned to dance on the razor edge, balancing throttle and traction, because the engine delivered everything at once and then nothing at all. What set the two-stroke apart was not just how fast it went, but how it made you feel, nervous, alive, and maybe a little out of control. The engine's simplicity was its superpower and its danger. It was an experience built on physics, not nostalgia. And it was this very character, this raw, addictive, uncompromising rush, that would soon become a target, not for engineering, but for paperwork. By the late 1980s, the 500 cubic centimetre Grand Prix paddock was a pressure cooker of speed, risk, and raw engineering. Yamaha, Suzuki, Honda, Aprilia, and Kawasaki lined up with machines that squeezed 180 to 200 horsepower from engines you could hold in one hand. There were no traction control systems, no anti-wheelie electronics, no algorithms smoothing out the chaos. The only thing between that power and disaster was the rider's right wrist and a patch of rubber the width of a credit card. This was the era of legends. Mick Doohan, with a shattered leg rebuilt by surgeons and willpower, muscled the Honda NSR 500 to 5 consecutive world titles. Kevin Schwantz, riding Suzuki's RG 500, became famous for a riding style that looked reckless until you realised it was the only way to keep a two-stroke on the edge. Valentino Rossi, the last superstar of the two-stroke age, danced the Yamaha YZ-ER 500 between grip and oblivion, his wins punctuated by that unmistakable banshee wail. Each of these riders knew that a mistake wasn't just a lost position, it could be a high-side crash at 120 miles per hour, a tumble into hay bales, or worse. The danger wasn't a side effect, it was built into the experience. The spectacle drew crowds in the tens of thousands. Fans came for the violence of the acceleration, the sight of bikes sliding sideways on the exit of every corner, the knowledge that no computer was going to save anyone. Every race was a test of nerve and instinct. No other racing class, before or since, put so much power in such a light, twitchy package and then asked human beings to tame it. The manufacturers fought for supremacy not just with money but with ideas. Radical port shapes, wild expansion chambers, new materials, all in the pursuit of a few more horsepower or a few fewer kilograms. The 500 cubic centimetre two-stroke Grand Prix machine was the closest thing motorcycle racing ever had to a pure, unfiltered challenge. It was a world where the difference between genius and disaster was measured in millimetres of throttle and split-second decisions. The excitement, the risk, and the innovation were inseparable. And in the end, it wasn't a crash or a technical failure that ended this era. It was the slow, silent advance of paperwork. A Yamaha RZ350 parked outside a high school, a Honda NSR 250 weaving through city traffic, a Suzuki RG 500 waiting at a stoplight. These bikes weren't reserved for professionals or collectors. They were sold alongside mopeds and commuter bikes, priced so that a teenager with a part-time job could dream of owning one. For less than a new car, you could buy a road-legal machine that weighed under 300 pounds and could outpace most sports cars. The RG 500, released in 1985, produced 95 horsepower from a compact engine. The NSR 250 and Aprilia RS 250 both topped 60 horsepower at the rear wheel, and their engines could be stripped down with nothing more than basic tools and a little patience. The real excitement started in garages and backyards. The two-stroke's simple design, no valves and no heavy camshafts, invited experimentation. Jet kits from Mikuni and Eurojets promised sharper throttle response for a modest price. Expansion chambers with their distinctive curves could be swapped in a few hours, shifting the power band and unlocking new speed. Port work, sometimes done with just a file, squeezed out extra horsepower for those willing to push the limits. Magazine ads offered high-flow reeds, race carbs and pipes, each claiming to shave seconds off a quarter-mile run. Tuning culture was everywhere. Friends gathered in parking lots to compare setups, swap jets and debate the best way to chase that sudden, violent surge when the engine hit its power band. The street became a rolling test bench. For a generation, the two-stroke wasn't just an engine, it was a rite of passage and a social passport, proof that performance belonged to everyone, not just the elite. In March 1978, the Environmental Protection Agency published a new rule in the Federal Register that would change the American motorcycle market overnight. For the first time, every new motorcycle sold in the United States had to meet strict hydrocarbon and nitrogen oxide limits, 0.8 grams per kilometre combined, with a separate cap of 0.5 grams per kilometre just for hydrocarbons. The numbers sound clinical, but for two-stroke engines they were a death sentence. Lab tests showed that even the cleanest two-strokes emitted more than a gram of hydrocarbons per kilometre, sometimes over 10 times what a four-stroke would produce. The EPA did not ban two-strokes outright. It just set a bar they could not clear without a total redesign. Manufacturers did not wait to see how close they could get. Within weeks of the announcement, Yamaha sent a bulletin to its dealers. The YZ250A would not be available in the United States for 1979. Suzuki's internal memos ordered the end of advertising for its GS500 two-stroke, shifting focus to the heavier, slower four-stroke version. Honda's press office quietly confirmed the C90 two-stroke would be phased out after 1980. The EPA's new test protocols, dynamometer runs, cold starts and meticulous record-keeping meant every engine family needed its own certificate. Fail once and the model was banned from sale nationwide. By 1982, the Motorcycle Dealers Association reported a 28% drop in two-stroke unit sales. The withdrawal was not gradual. It was a direct response to a regulatory line in the sand. The two-stroke's fate was sealed not by market demand or engineering limits, but by paperwork and a set of numbers that made business as usual impossible. Euro 1 arrived in 1999 as a quiet line in the sand, a technical directive, not a headline, but it landed with the force of a ban for road-going two-strokes. The numbers were simple: hydrocarbons capped at 0.2 grams per kilometre, and carbon monoxide at 2 grams per kilometre. On paper, the law did not target any one engine. In practice, it shut the door on the classic two-stroke overnight. Carbureted engines that once defined the Aprilia RS125, Yamaha TZR and Cagiva Maito could not clear the bar without losing the very qualities that made them legends: their wild power band, their lightness, their price. Manufacturers ran the calculations and saw the writing on the wall. Fitting oxidation catalysts or reworking port timing meant higher costs and more weight, exactly what the market for these bikes would not accept. Aprilia, in a 2003 press statement, called the RS125's coming endgame a matter of compliance, not demand. Within 5 years, the effect was absolute. By 2004, no new two-stroke road bikes were being sold anywhere in Europe. Registration data from Italy and Germany show the RS125 and RS250 vanishing from sales charts, while Japanese brands quietly withdrew their last two-stroke models from European showrooms. Enthusiast demand had not disappeared, but the paperwork had outpaced it. Euro 1 did not just squeeze the segment, it made the idea of a new legal two-stroke road bike a relic. The market did not die by consumer choice or technical defeat. It was narrowed, step by regulatory step, until there was nothing left to buy. In 2002, the Fédération Internationale de Motocyclisme issued a single announcement that would redraw the map of motorcycle racing. The 500 cubic centimetres two-stroke Grand Prix class, once the pinnacle of raw, unfiltered speed, was replaced overnight by a new formula: 990 cubic centimetres four-strokes under the banner of MotoGP. The official line cited safety, environmental goals, and the need for racing to stay relevant to road technology. Behind the scenes, the story was less about progress and more about pressure. Manufacturers facing tightening emissions laws in Europe and Japan saw a chance to consolidate their investments, pouring research and development into four-stroke platforms that could be raced and sold without running afoul of regulators. The last true two-stroke Grand Prix season ended in 2001, with Valentino Rossi taking the final championship on a Yamaha YZR500. By the next year, the grid was dominated by four-strokes, and the banshee wail of a two-stroke at full throttle was relegated to memory. Off the track, the squeeze was just as relentless. In 2006, the Euro 3 emissions standard landed like a final verdict. Hydrocarbons were capped at 0.05 grams per kilometre, carbon monoxide at 0.5 grams per kilometre. These were not numbers any carbureted two-stroke could reach without gutting its identity. Aprilia, once the last holdout, announced the end of the RS125 and RS250. Derby, Gilera and Malaguti, brands with decades of history, folded their two-stroke lines or shuttered entirely. Italian registration data shows the RS125 dropping from thousands of units a year to almost zero in less than 2 seasons. The RS250 vanished from sales charts after 2006. The same story played out in Germany and France. There was no scandal, no dramatic recall, just a bureaucratic chokehold that closed the market, model by model. The official explanations always circle back to safety and environmental stewardship. Four-strokes with their smoother power delivery and lower emissions fit the new world order. But the unofficial reality was that industry, regulators, and even race organisers found common ground in making the two-stroke unviable. The rules never banned the engine outright, they just set standards it could not meet, then moved the finish line every time technology got close. Direct injection two-stroke systems, which could have met later emissions targets, never got a real shot. The regulatory framework was locked before the technology could prove itself. What happened was not sabotage, it was a slow, calculated lockout. The two-stroke did not run out of ideas. It ran out of time. Governments did not set out to kill the engine, they just wrote rules that made its survival impossible. Re-engineering a compliant two-stroke was not just technically daunting, it was economically irrational. Aprilia's own technical brief from 2004 spelled it out. Retrofitting a 125 cubic centimetres two-stroke with a secondary air pump catalyst would drive up production costs by more than 30% and add weight that would gut the bike's appeal. Japanese manufacturers ran their own numbers and hit the same wall. Honda's internal analysis put the research and development expense for Euro 3 compliance at over 10% of the annual budget, just for two-strokes. It was cheaper, faster and safer to pivot to four-stroke engines, even if the end product was heavier and less thrilling, but the squeeze did not stop with emissions labs. In Germany and the UK, insurance companies began tacking surcharges onto high-performance two-strokes, treating them as a risk class apart, too fast and too tempting for young riders and too likely to end in a claim. Banks followed suit, quietly refusing to finance new purchases of two-stroke sport bikes or to back dealer inventory. The message was clear. These machines were no longer welcome in the mainstream market, no matter how much riders wanted them. Meanwhile, the Japanese Big Four, Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki and Kawasaki, shifted their research and development budgets toward four-stroke platforms, pouring money into complex fuel injection, electronic controls and new oil formulas. Aftermarket electronics firms and oil companies saw their sales climb, riding the wave of four-stroke dominance. The losers were easy to spot, niche brands that could not afford the switch, and generations of riders who would never know what a power band feels like when it comes on all at once. The two-stroke was not out-engineered, it was priced, insured and financed out of existence. A carbureted two-stroke motorcycle straight from the factory could dump more than 10 times the unburned hydrocarbons into the air than any four-stroke ever did. That number tenfold became the hammer regulators used to drive the engine out of the mainstream. The numbers were not exaggerated. In EPA and EU lab tests, even the cleanest road-going two-strokes blew past every legal limit on hydrocarbons, no matter how carefully they were tuned. The rules did not mention two-strokes by name, but the effect was surgical. Once the paperwork was in place, there was no way back. At least not for the engines, everyone knew. But technology did not stand still. In the late 1990s, as the last legal two-strokes were being boxed up and sent to the history section, a different path was taking shape in the background. Orbital's direct injection system, transfer port injection, could cut hydrocarbon emissions by more than half, slashing the very pollutants that doomed the classic design. Ficht and Synerject followed, each promising cleaner combustion and real-time fuel control. KTM's TPI and freeride models using electronic injection would eventually meet or beat the emissions limits that had once been impossible. By the time these systems were market-ready, the category was already dead. The rules had been written for the world of 1999, not the one that followed. No government ever went back to ask whether the new two-strokes could be given a second chance. On paper, the two-stroke vanished from the streets, but in the real world it never quite died. Motocross and trials bikes slipped through on off-road exemptions protected by a legal technicality. In Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, grey market imports kept the sound alive, with bikes like the Yamaha RX-Z and Suzuki RG V250 still changing hands decades after their supposed extinction. The restoration market tells its own story. A Yamaha RD350 that sold for $2,500 in 1980 now fetches $12,000 or more, and the buyers are often younger riders who never saw these machines in showrooms. The appetite for the raw, simple thrill of a two-stroke has not faded. It has just been forced underground or into the hands of collectors. The unanswered question hangs in the air. If cleaner two-stroke technology was possible, why did the rules never change? Why was there no window for a new generation of engines that could deliver the same excitement without the old pollution? The paperwork never caught up to the engineering. Governments did not set out to kill the two-stroke. They just wrote rules that made its survival impossible. Today, no engine offers what the two-stroke once did. Explosive power from every crank revolution, fewer moving parts than any modern four-stroke, and an unmatched thrill per dollar. Bureaucracy didn't outlaw excitement, it quietly erased it line by line until innovation ran out of time, not ideas. Governments didn't set out to kill the two-stroke, they wrote rules that made it impossible to survive. What is lost isn't just technology, it's nerve.